I didn't expect the rain to follow me up the elevator, but in Seattle, it always does. It came along as a mist, soft enough to leave halos on glass and curls in hair, and it made the rooftop look like a postcard somebody had breathed on. People I'd worked with for 20 years were gathered around heat lamps, clinking glasses and telling me I'd finally earned a nap. Brooke waved from the railing with that bright, eager smile of someone who wants to be the first to make the toast. Jonah looped an arm over my shoulders and told me I smelled like books and orange peels. It felt good, loud, warm, simple. The bartender leaned in to collect empties. He had freckles and a bar towel tucked into his apron like a flag. "Congrats, Miss Hart," he said, barely louder than the rain. Then, almost without moving his lips, "Check under your coaster." I laughed, because of course I did. Retirement pranks. I lifted the edge anyway. There was a dusting of something on the black rubber, a faint, chalky shimmer you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. My first thought was sugar. My second was ridiculous. My third was the quick, heavy drop you feel when an elevator starts to fall. Brooke was suddenly at my elbow. "Wait, don't sip yet," she said, playful, breathless. "We have to do this right." She lifted her glass and nudged mine until the rims kissed. "To fresh starts, and finally letting people take care of you." It was the kind of line that sounds sweet and sticks like tape. I smiled and set my glass down. My hand found the sage green thermos in my tote, my little habit since last winter, when the building's coffee went from bad to worse. The steel felt cool and certain in my palm. It reminded me I wasn't trapped at anyone's table. "Taste it," Brooke coaxed, laughing like we were in on something together. "Come on, Eve. One good sip for the reel I'm making." Jonah had moved to thank the dean. Applause rose and fell like a soft tide. I looked at the coaster again. Maybe it really was powdered sugar. Maybe the bartender was flirting with mischief. Maybe I was letting the past talk too loudly in my ear. When you've lived through hospitals and night shifts and the kind of grief that turns you into a secretary of pills and appointments, your mind collects shadows. Mine is tidy. It still remembers where I stored them. I lifted the glass, let the smell of citrus and something floral ride the rim. I watched Brooke's eyes. Not the drink. She wanted that first clink so badly. Wanted it on video, tagged, captioned, saved. I thought about how care can be a hug or a harness, and how, from a distance, they look the same. "Hold that thought," I said, and laughed as if I'd remembered a joke. I slid my coaster toward the edge of the table, as though making room for cake. The rain feathered against my sleeve. I could have been wrong. I could have been a paranoid old librarian with a fear of being a burden and a thermos for a shield. But if I wasn't wrong, if I was even a little right, then what was under that coaster wasn't a prank, and what was in my cup didn't belong to me. The thing about celebrations is they make everyone a little braver with their suggestions. After the rooftop, we drifted downstairs to the lounge where the lighting was kinder and the opinions were not. Jonah took the armchair across from me, knees bouncing the way they did when he was 10 and hiding frog jars under his bed. "You did it, Mom," he said, squeezing my hand. "Now you get to rest. Like, actually rest." The pride in his voice made my ribs soften. The worry underneath made them stiffen again. Brooke sat on the arm of his chair, a careful arrangement of sympathy and sparkle. "We've been talking," she said. That gentle voice people use when they want you to nod along. "Jonah's schedule is insane. My shifts flip every week. It's not fair for you to juggle everything alone. We should get ahead of things." "Get ahead of what?" I asked, smiling because smiles are armor. "Little stuff," she said, already pulling a glossy brochure from her tote like a magician. A place with a meadow on the front, a woman my age laughing with a younger actor who could be her paid grandson. It's not a facility. It's a community. Short-term support, classes, on-site nurse. Preventive, not reactive. Just options. Jonah cleared his throat. "You always took care of everyone else. You shouldn't have to." "I know," I said. I heard the love in it. I also heard the sentence Brooke wanted to finish for him. "Let people take care of you." Grant arrived the way salesmen do, casual like a neighbor with a pie. "Grant Myers," he said, offering a hand and a grin. "I help families keep things simple." He spoke in warm verbs: streamline, protect, smooth, secure. He laughed at my librarian jokes, which is a cheap shortcut to trust. He dropped phrases like, lightweight paperwork, and, just in case, and we can reverse it anytime, which is a cheap shortcut to yes. My thermos sat on the low table, lid off, empty the color of it, a soft green that should have calmed me. It looked like a lighthouse to me, or maybe a traffic cone. I turned it slowly by its dented base and thought about how every "for your safety" I'd heard in the last hour carried a little hook buried in the bait. Nothing major, Grant went on, sliding a one-pager across the table as if it had wandered there on its own. A limited power of attorney. Only for convenience, so Jonah can help if there's an emergency. No loss of control. You stay captain. I am captain, I said lightly, because saying it out loud helps me remember. Exactly, Brooke chimed in. Captain's delegate. She said it like a gift. Jonah watched my face carefully, like a weatherman reading clouds. I don't think he knew what answer he wanted. I did what I always do when I need a second. I asked about dessert. Brooke laughed and ordered something with lemon and tiny spoons. Grant offered to draft language and circle back Monday. I said I'd read anything they sent, at home, in quiet, with tea. Of course, he said, already tucking the brochure back into my tote like it lived there. We're just here to make it easier. That's the phrase that always does it easier. It's the one that whispers to the tired part of you that says, fine, take it. I capped my thermos and slid it toward me, a silly little act of possession that felt bigger than it should have. On the ride home, my phone buzzed against my hip. One new message from Brooke, confetti emoji and a heart. Beneath it, a link that said, limited POA template, easy, quick, and ready. I told myself it was nothing, powdered sugar, salt, a joke from a bored bartender, but I still kept my hand on the thermos. When the lemon tarts came out and everyone leaned forward, laughter rippling through the table, I did the smallest, silliest thing. I shifted my glass 2 inches to the left and hers 2 inches to the right. Rims kissed, stems crossed, nobody watching. Years of shelving books taught me how to move a thing without announcing that you've moved it. Okay, one real toast, Brooke said, already holding the phone up like a tiny trophy. Eve, to rest and letting us spoil you. She was glowing, ponytail glossy with rain. Her cheerfulness could have lit the ferry docks. I lifted my glass just high enough to meet hers and let them touch. There was that ring of sound people love to record. I didn't drink. I smiled and winked as if I had. Then I put the glass down and reached for my thermos. I always brew cinnamon tea at home. The scent is a map back to myself. I sipped that instead, and the warmth ran a line of courage down my throat. It took 3 minutes for the first crack to show. Brooke's hand slipped off her phone. She pressed her fingers to the little dip at the base of her throat like she'd swallowed wrong. Weird, she said, laughing. Because laughter is the first bandage. You okay? Jonah asked, touching her elbow. Probably haven't eaten enough, she said, picking at a tart, but the color in her cheeks had gone the gray of Seattle pavement after a bus passes. She took a shallow breath, then another one. The third didn't sound like it got where it was supposed to go. I heard myself suggest water. I heard myself say it the way nurses say it, calm, low, like calm can reroute a river. Her hand was shaking now. Not dramatic, just that light electric tremor you'd miss if you were busy telling a story. I set my thermos down and slid my napkin under her wrist. I am not a nurse, but I have done night after night of caretaking, and the body keeps more than books. Maybe we should sit, I said, but she was already sitting. Jonah's knee hit the table. The spoon spun. The bartender appeared with a pitcher. Someone clapped for nothing, then realized and stopped. The room changed temperature the way rooms do when one person becomes the center of gravity. Brooke tried to stand and sat again. Fast, knees buckling, that pale sweating that ignores the weather. Her smile stayed on a second too long, like makeup in the rain. Then it slipped. She looked at me, and for a breath there was no role play in it, just a young woman frightened by her own heart. Call 911, I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it was. While Jonah fumbled for his phone, I moved like I was fetching gum from my bag. I lifted the rubber coaster that had been under my glass and slid it, face down, into a zip bag I keep for almonds and receipts. I took a photo of the table glasses, tart crumbs, The coasters faint dust on the wood because memory tells stories and timestamps tell facts. My hands were colder than they had any right to be. I told them to work anyway. The siren took years to arrive, and then it was there instantly. Paramedics in bright jackets and efficient voices, asking the right questions in a choreography I could have counted in my sleep. What did she drink? How much? Any meds? I heard Jonah say her name 3 times, like saying it correctly would nudge the universe into fairness. I heard myself answer carefully. What I'd seen, what I hadn't. What time we'd made that little ring of sound. On the elevator down with the medics, I watched the glass walls collect more rain. Brooke's head lolled against the stretcher, eyes open but not choosing a point to look at. She was breathing but working at it. I wanted to reach for Jonah. I wanted to reach for my husband, who would have known exactly how to iron the panic out of my face. Instead, I reached for the only thing that felt like solid ground, the thermos. I tucked it against my ribs like a book I wasn't ready to check in. At the curb, while the ambulance doors folded closed, the bartender found me. He didn't smile this time. "You saw it?" he asked, barely making a question out of it. "I saw enough," I said. "Thank you." "For what it's worth," he murmured. "I don't think you're wrong." The doors sealed with that soft rubber thump, and the vehicle pulled into the wet night with Jonah inside. I stood under the awning a second longer than necessary, the zip bag in my pocket, my mouth tasting like cinnamon and something metal. I told myself I had done the only thing I could do. I told myself I didn't owe guilt to a situation I hadn't made. Still, as the taillights blurred into a red ribbon, a thought pressed its thumb against my ribs. If that glass wasn't meant for her, then what was I being eased toward, and why did someone need me to toast to it first? Emergency rooms have a way of making everything feel smaller, voices, choices, even the size of your own body. They put you in chairs that squeak and give you a view of a clock that refuses to move. A nurse took Brooke through double doors, while a volunteer pressed a foam cup of water into my hand like an apology. Jonah paced a figure 8 in front of the vending machine, all elbows and phone cords, saying her name to the air as if it needed practice. A resident finally appeared, young and bearded, with the polite gravity of someone learning to deliver news without breaking it. "Vitals are stabilizing," he said. "Could be a reaction, could be something she ate at the event. We'll run labs to be safe," he said. "To be safe, the way people say, just in case. Like a blanket you throw over doubt so it stops thrashing." "Food poisoning," Jonah said, catching the phrase like a lifeline. "She barely had lunch." He smiled at me, tentative, grateful to have something ordinary to hold. "You know how Brooke is with dairy." I nodded because nodding was the language of that room. The ER smelled like alcohol swabs and rain on rubber. I set the cup down and wrapped both hands around my thermos instead. The steel had kept its temperature. It always does. Holding it felt like standing on the one tile that doesn't wobble. A nurse poked her head out and asked if Brooke had any medications or supplements. Jonah opened his mouth to answer and then looked at me, as if whatever I said could revise the past. "She took a multivitamin before we left," he said, landing on something nobody could argue with. "And a probiotic." "We'll note it," the nurse said, which is hospital for I can't promise that means anything. When we were alone again, Jonah's face softened in a way that made him look 5. "Mom, she wouldn't hurt you. Brooke loves you. She worries. We both do." "After Dad," he swallowed, and the rest of the sentence pressed through the skin of silence between us. "After Dad, everything can look like a warning label." "I know," I said. "Worry is a kind of love that forgot its manners." His phone buzzed. He glanced down, typed something, tucked it away. "Grant says he can meet us Monday to talk through protections, just temporary stuff. If the last 24 hours taught us anything, it's we need to be prepared." He offered me a smile I recognized from his childhood, the one he used when he'd already built the pillow fort and wanted me to say yes to the rules posted on the door. Prepared is a good word. It sounds like clean socks and flashlights. It doesn't sound like handing your keys to someone else. I turned the thermos cap until it clicked. Somewhere behind the doors, metal trays landed softly on rails, a code announced itself in tones, and the clock kept its stubborn opinion about minutes. The resident came back with a calmer face. "We're keeping her for observation. Initial labs aren't alarming, likely a gastrointestinal thing. Likely is another hospital word, the cousin of maybe and someday. Jonah let out a breath like he'd been holding it since the rooftop. Thank God, he said. See? Probably just bad shrimp. He touched my shoulder, and it was meant to comfort, and part of it did. But another part of me, the part that can still inventory pill bottles by sound, stared at the foam cup, at the word likely, at the memory of powder on rubber. I told myself to be reasonable. I told myself the simplest story wins. My phone vibrated, a private little bee against my hip. Unknown number. One line. No greeting. No punctuation. Like someone texting from inside a closet. Ask for a talk screen with digoxin panel. By the time I got home, the rain had become a soft metronome on the porch railing. I stood in the hallway longer than made sense, keys in hand, feeling that old impulse to call someone and ask permission to be alarmed. Instead, I texted Caleb next door. Are you awake? I need a boring brain. He replied with a thumbs up and a line I could hear in his voice. Don't argue, Audit. Bring your tote. His kitchen smells like citrus and copy paper. He poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs and let me talk until the story stopped shaking. When I got to the coaster, he didn't interrupt. When I got to Jonah saying, prepared, his jaw worked like he was chewing on a rule. Okay, he said finally, sliding a legal pad toward me. No speeches, we make paper. He wrote the words like headers: calm, collect, confirm. Under calm, he put a box and made me check it off. You're here, you're breathing, you're not calling anyone to accuse them of anything. Good. Under collect, he started the family incident log. Date, time, place, who said what, who touched which glass. I emptied my tote like a bird building a nest receipt, napkin, the zip bag with the rubber circle face down inside. He added coaster preserved and circled it, then snapped photos of everything, and a photo of me sealing the bag again. Redundancy, he said. You taught me that with library backups. He's not everyone. Under confirm, he had me open the hospital's portal and submit a polite request. Please, add full toxicology, including digoxin, glycoside screen. No accusations, just specifics and timestamps. We took a photo of the submission confirmation. We emailed my primary care physician, not for fear-mongering, but to flag that I might need follow-up labs. Paper is calmer than panic. It doesn't raise its voice. Finances, Caleb said, softer. I understood without being told. I logged into my credit union and toggled off anything that moved money without asking me first. Autopay pauses. Alerts turned on for every transaction above the price of a sandwich. I changed 2 passwords I'd been lazy about and deleted a saved login on a device I barely use. None of it felt dramatic. It felt like closing windows when the weather shifts. We printed a 1-page boundary card and stuck it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a fairy. No paper, no power. Slow is safe. My cup, my call. Before I left, Caleb peeled a small label from his junk drawer and stuck it on my sage thermos, CCL. He grinned. Calm, collect, confirm, consider it a brand. In bed, I could still hear ER beeps echoing in my head, so I wrote everything again in the log, this time in my own handwriting. It's amazing how much steadier you feel when letters line up. The unknown number texted once more, just a period, like a nod from the dark. I turned the phone face down. Morning brought that particular Seattle light that makes even worries look neatly outlined. I made cinnamon tea, capped the thermos, and read the polite email from Grant. Let's meet at Soundview Credit Union Monday, 10 a.m. I'll bring a notary so it's seamless. He added a smiley, as if convenience were a compliment. I replied with one sentence. I'll bring a note-taker. Then I slid the thermos into my tote, touched the CCL label with my thumb, and told myself I didn't have to prove anything to anyone at a table I didn't set. The bank calendar invite pinged a second later, confirmed. Notary present, and for the first time since the rooftop, I felt the tremor return, light as a wire under skin. By noon the next day, the ER portal lit up with a new message, the kind that makes your breath go shallow before you even click. It was from a nurse named Priya, polite, precise, the sort of tone that only shows up when someone has practiced being clear on very bad days. Preliminary labs show cardiac glycosides present, it said. Alcohol noted. Recommendation: repeat labs to confirm. Consider notifying law enforcement. It read like a weather report and hit like thunder. I stared at the words until they blurred, then read them again out loud, slowly, the way I used to read difficult passages to students who needed every syllable to land. Cardiac glycosides. I am not a doctor, but I have lived in medicine's waiting rooms long enough to know what that meant in the vicinity of wine. Not a joke, not a shrimp, not my imagination growing fangs. I poured tea into my thermos and only then realized my hands were cold. The cinnamon steadied me. The stainless steel did what stainless steel always does, held its line. I opened the family incident log and wrote the exact phrasing from the portal, the timestamp, the recommendation. Paper calms panic. When I finished, my pulse had settled enough to text Jonah. Call me when you can. Important, but I'm okay. He called 2 minutes later, the hurried breath of a man who had run to another room for privacy. I read him the message. There was a long pause in which I could hear his mind reassembling furniture. So, not food, he said finally, the words small. Glycosides like heart meds? Like that, I said. The note from the rooftop wasn't a prank, Jonah. He exhaled hard, a sound I felt in my own ribs. I don't want this to be true, he said. I also don't want to be the person who keeps telling you to ignore your gut. The sentence shook on the way out. I'll call detective services. I'll go back to the hospital and ask them to flag the chart for evidence handling. I should have done that last night. You're doing it now, I said. That's what counts. There was another pause, and something softer stepped into his voice. Mom, I know I've been pushing prepared like it's neutral, but if every care conversation happens right after a health scare, maybe the timing isn't a coincidence. Maybe it's a pipeline. Health scare to paperwork, I said. A conveyor belt. My laptop chimed. A new email crawled across the corner of the screen from Grant, cheerful as a confetti cannon. Draft POA attached, time sensitive. Let's get this signed while everyone's attention is aligned. The attachment icon blinked like a lighthouse. I didn't open it. I forwarded it to the log email I'd made for myself and added the entry. Attachment received pre-signature. Sender, financial advisor. Subject line, time sensitive. I just got something from Grant, I told Jonah. He wants signatures while attention is aligned. I'm reading that as, while you're scared. Jonah swore under his breath, the first honest word I'd heard from him in days. I told him to slow down, he said. He said sometimes moving quickly prevents complications. Slow is safe, I said, and the phrase fell into place like a key in a familiar lock. We cancel the bank meeting until we have clarity. We keep everything in writing. If he pushes, we write that down too. Agreed, he said, and I could hear the choice stand up inside him. I'll email the bank right now and ask to hold all changes pending investigation, and I'll call the detective. You shouldn't have to be the only adult in this room. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and let the quiet drape itself over me. The rain was back to tapping its Morse code on the window. I opened a fresh page in the log and drew a little pipeline. Health scare urgency paperwork. Under it I wrote in block letters, no paper, no power. My printer woke on its own. Grant's attachment had auto-downloaded, the machine eager to be helpful. The tray clicked, motors hummed, and the first page slid out with a tidy confidence that made my stomach turn. I didn't touch it. I watched it spit page after page into a neat stack and thought about how dangerous seamless can be when you're the one being smoothed. Numbers don't lie. Timestamps don't flatter. And today, the only thing I pour into my cup is what I choose. Grant showed up to Soundview with the weather on his side, blue patch of sky, jacket the color of confidence, a smile that said we were all going to be grateful later. The lobby smelled like lemons and printer ink. He'd booked one of those little glass rooms where everything looks transparent and nothing is. The notary was already inside, a woman with a tidy bun and a stamp that gleamed like a medal on the table. Brooke got there before Jonah, cheeks bright from the air. I'm so sorry about the other night, she said, voice soft enough to wrap around my wrist. I don't know what happened. I hate that you had to see me like that. She bit her lip and put a hand on her chest the way people do when they want you to place your forgiveness there. I'm glad you're okay, I said, and kept my bag on my lap. The thermos was the same weight as always. I set it down in the center of the table, lid on, like a paperweight for invisible pages. Grant slid a thin folder toward me with a flourish that would have pleased a stage magician. Kept it as lightweight as possible, he said. Limited power of attorney. Not durable, not scary. Bare minimum so Jonah can help if needed. We'll notarize, scan, and you're out in 10. It was the 10 that hooked my ear. He'd rehearsed that part, the promise that this would cost me less than a coffee break. Jonah slipped into the chair beside me, apology already in his shoulders. Brooke took the seat opposite, hands folded, eyes damp, performing the idea of concern so earnestly I almost believed it again. Before we start, I said, and felt my voice arrive with me, I'm going to read it. All the way. Out loud. Grant's smile pinched for a second, as if a muscle remembered an old injury. Of course, he said, recovering. We love informed clients. So I read. Slowly. The way I read to students who needed commas to be handrails. The first page was all comfort, Captain, convenience, cooperation. Then the clause appeared, dressed in soft words, springing upon determination of incapacity by a licensed professional. I stopped. The room tried to keep breathing on my behalf. What does that mean in plain language? I asked. Just standard stuff, Grant said smoothly. Only activates if a doctor signs off that you need short-term help. It's guardrails. Which doctor? I asked. Mine or someone convenient? Any licensed professional, the notary offered, voice neutral as a waiting room. Who picks the professional? Grant's pen made a small, chirpy click. In an emergency, whoever's available. We don't want red tape in a crisis. I turned to the addendum. It had a tone I recognized, reassuring verbs that leaned forward and a few nouns that ducked their heads when you looked directly at them. There was a paragraph about consolidating accounts for efficiency and another about temporary custody of essential documents, and I realized the paper was trying to stand in my house and hold my keys. Why is temporary not defined? I asked, pointing. Because we customize after signing, Grant said. This is a template. We fill in practicality later. Why would we sign blank spaces? I asked. The notary's pen tapped once against the folder, as if to remind the room she was still there. Brooke leaned in, palms open. Eve, no one is trying to take anything from you. We just want to make it easier. The other night scared me. It scared Jonah. What if what? I said gently. Finish that sentence. She swallowed. What if something happens and we're stuck waiting on paperwork while you need help? Jonah rested a hand on my forearm. Mom, we can add limits. We can make it airtight. So, I lifted my thermos and took a sip I didn't need, just to feel heat move through me. The CCL label rasped under my thumb. If it's airtight, then you won't mind precision, I said, and turned back to the pages. Who authored this? Whose software? Where is the original kept? What's the revocation process? What notifications are triggered when it's used? Is consent recorded or just implied? Who witnesses the doctor's capacity determination? What's the appeal route if there's a mistake? I didn't plan the list. It was simply there, like a drawer I finally opened all the way. Caleb's voice was in it somewhere, and my husband's steadiness, and the nurse from the ER who said preliminary like a promise not to overstate. Grant's laugh landed a little left of friendly. You're thorough. I'm alive, I said. Thorough is a side effect. He flipped to the signature page, as if turning a calendar could change the weather. We can tighten language later, he said. Right now, getting something in place is the key, and I brought a notary so you don't have to make 2 trips. Notary's witness, I said. They don't bless content. I looked at the notary then. Really looked nameplate, commission number, the embossed stamp in its little velvet bed. The last name tugged at me like a loose thread. I couldn't place it. Then my phone buzzed in my bag with a text from Caleb. If the notary is Elle Voss, ask who engaged her. She's on every quick POA file Grant did last quarter. I let the silence do a slow lap around the table. The bank's glass walls showed a row of people depositing small checks, tapping screens, living out their ordinary Saturdays. Inside the bubble, the paper waited between us, patient as gravity. Who engaged the notary? I asked, keeping my voice cordial, like a librarian asking for a call number. You or Jonah? Grant didn't blink. "I took the liberty," he said. "Saves you the hassle." "That's kind," I said. I tapped the springing clause with my index finger. "And who chose the language here?" He hesitated a beat too long. Brooke looked at Jonah. Jonah looked at me. Outside, a scrap of cloud pulled back from the sun, just enough to throw our reflections onto the glass. The stamp gleamed. My thermos shone a little too, that stubborn green that refuses to be anything but itself. "I'm not signing anything with blanks," I said softly. "And if this only activates when a doctor says I can't decide, then we will define the doctor, define the process, and define how I get to say so when I'm fine." "It's just a template," Grant said again, as if repetition could sand the edges. "Then it can wait until it's specific," I said. The notary shifted in her chair. Her commission number was visible now, neat black digits. I took a photo of the nameplate, the number, the stamp. "For my records," I said, "because that's a sentence that makes people behave." Grant's smile thinned. "We're losing time," he said. "These windows close." "Convenience isn't a clock," I said. "It's a choice." My phone buzzed again. "Caleb, one more line. She's also Brooke's mom's notary. There's a particular quiet the house keeps after you tell someone no. It isn't empty. It's a hum, like the fridge thinking." I sat at the kitchen table with the thermos in front of me and the boundary card on the fridge, and I waited to feel like a monster. That's what saying no usually does to me, kicks a panel loose inside my chest where old guilt lives. I thought about all the small compliances that built my life. Staying up when I needed to sleep, smiling when I wanted to step outside, agreeing because the other person looked relieved when I did. Caregiving trains you to read rooms like weather. It also teaches you to ignore the thunder in your own bones. Somewhere along the way I decided good meant agreeable, and that love was measured by how quickly I could make myself smaller. The library runs a Tuesday night group that isn't quite therapy and isn't not. People bring coffee and grief and questions about what to do with both. I went because the rain herds us into rooms where talking makes us warmer. I told the circle I'd spent a decade becoming useful, and now usefulness felt like a trap someone was decorating in my favorite colors. A woman with silver hair said, "Sometimes kind is just the costume fear wears to get past your door." A man in a mariner's cap added, "There's a difference between being helpful and being handled." On the way home, I remembered the last week of my husband's life, how the hospice nurse kept saying, "Slow down, Evelyn. He hears you better when you breathe." I had thought she meant him. I think she meant me. I pulled the car over 2 blocks from the house and wrote 3 sentences on an index card so my hands couldn't unlearn them. No paper, no power. Slow is safe. My cup, my call. Back in my kitchen, I peeled a label from the junk drawer and stuck it on the thermos, boundary inside. It made me laugh out loud, ridiculous and perfect. I poured cinnamon tea, watched the steam lift, and felt something old loosen in my shoulders. Saying no didn't make me a villain. It made me a steward. I opened my notebook and wrote the rule I wish someone had handed me when I was 25. Help is welcome. Control is not. Under it, I listed what welcome looks like in my house rides: soup, company by invitation, bills I choose to review with Jonah when my brain isn't fogged. Then I listed what control looks like: rushing, secrecy, blanks on documents, notaries arriving like door prizes, language no one will read out loud. If a thing shows up wearing any of those, it waits. Or it leaves. I sent Jonah a message. "I'm not signing anything I can't define and revoke. We'll build our own plan, on our timeline, with a lawyer who works for me." He wrote back, "I'm with you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." That's the thing about identity shifts. You expect fireworks. Mostly it feels like a door you didn't know was locked finally opening, and the room on the other side is just your own kitchen, but brighter. I set out my tools for tomorrow like a student before a test. The log, the copies, the photos, the list of questions printed twice. I checked the state's website for recording laws. Washington lets you record with consent, so consent would be the first sentence out of my mouth. Paper isn't about drama. It's about not having to perform later. Before bed, I stood at the sink with my hands in warm water and admitted the thing I've been skirting. I've been afraid of being hard to love. That's why easier works on me. The thought didn't crush me the way it used to. It just sat there, seen, and lost some of its teeth. I dried my hands and touched the thermos label like a benediction. In the morning, I called Grant and scheduled one more meeting, my time, my location, witness present. When I hung up, I opened the voice memo app and practiced the sentence I'd start with. For everyone's clarity, we're recording this conversation with consent. My thumb hovered over the red circle. The house was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's sprinkler ticked in a polite rhythm. I pressed the button. Beep. Soundview looks different when you walk in carrying your own rules. Caleb met me on the sidewalk with a notebook and that calm face he wears when he's about to turn chaos into bullet points. "You good?" he asked. I held up the thermos so he could see the sticker. He smiled. "Good enough." At the teller desk, I asked for a small conference room and a supervisor. Not a scene, just a request in a voice that didn't apologize for existing. When the assistant manager arrived, I introduced everyone and started with the sentence I'd practiced. For everyone's clarity, we're recording this conversation with consent. She nodded and hit her phone's red circle to mirror mine, and the room grew very honest. Grant was brisk, Brooke was sugar, Jonah was caught between. I kept my bag on my lap and my list on the table. Today is document, notify, enforce, I said, tapping the page like a metronome. Document, we will read any proposed change aloud. Notify, the bank will log who requested it, when, and by which channel. Enforce, no changes without independent verification from my own primary care physician, in writing and a cooling off period. Grant's smile tried to jump ahead of the sentence. Absolutely. This is just housekeeping. Then we'll dust the corners, I said, and began. I read every line of his draft. Full voice, commas included. When I hit the clause about temporary custody of essential documents, I stopped. Define temporary, I said. Define custody. Define essential. Caleb's pen made neat scratch marks. The assistant manager leaned in, more banker than bystander now. We can place a hold on any power of attorney until those definitions are added, she offered, matter of fact. Do that, I said. Also, flag my account so that any POA requests trigger an alert to me and require in-person verification with my doctor's letter attached. Grant coughed. That's highly conservative. I'm almost 60, I said. Conservative is my favorite color. Brooke reached for my hand and stopped halfway. Eve, we just want to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. She looked at Jonah like he was supposed to carry the sentence to safety. Nothing is falling, I said. We're building rails. The assistant manager clicked through screens like someone opening windows in a stuffy house. We can also freeze beneficiary changes and require 2 business days before wires over a threshold. She glanced up. You set the threshold. Anything that could buy a used car, I said, and she laughed, then typed. The laugh wasn't unkind. It was relief with manners. Grant kept flicking his pen. The notary's waiting, he reminded. Like a flight we were late to. I slid the notary's card back to him. She can go, I said. We're not signing blanks. When this is specific, we'll book someone independent. Jonah cleared his throat. I support this, he told the manager, and his voice was steady the way his father's used to be when he'd decided. Something unclenched in my chest that I hadn't known was gripping me from the inside. Last item, I said, and took a sip from the thermos I didn't need. All meeting notes today, including recordings, get emailed to me before close of business. If any party follows up by phone, they also send the substance of that call by email. If they don't, we will. The manager nodded, almost grateful to be told how to keep us all safe. I'll write it into the profile, she said. I wish all families were this clear. We stood. Papers stayed put. On the way out, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. No text this time, an image. Grant in a lobby I didn't know, shoulder to shoulder with the notary from yesterday, and a woman I'd only seen in photos, Brooke's mother, smiling under a plaque that read Cascade Mutual Insurance. The message that followed was 3 words. Same team, always. I stopped at the glass doors and handed the phone to Caleb. He stared for a long beat, then exhaled through his teeth. Well, he said, soft as a verdict, that's not even subtle. Inside the lobby, Grant was telling Brooke something that made her lower her head and nod. Jonah watched me, waiting to learn which language our family would speak next, panic or paper. I tapped the CCL label with my thumb and felt the decision settle where fear had been living. Document, I said to Caleb. Notify. Then I looked back at the trio through the bank's clean glass and finished the sentence I owed myself. And now, we enforce. There's a sound paper makes when it thinks it's smarter than you. It's the soft swagger of legalese, the way a sentence smiles with one half of its mouth while the other half picks your pocket. After the photo outside Soundview, I went home and did what I do when something pretends to be complicated. I started reading where it didn't expect me. Licenses are public if you know which drawer to open. Grant's website had a glossy fiduciary banner, but the Washington Insurance Database listed him as a producer with active appointments at Cascade Mutual. His bio talked about families and peace of mind. The filing talked about annuities and suitability. I'm allergic to scare words, but I've learned to hear the quiet ones: consolidate, streamline, protect, because sometimes they translate to commission, override, persistency bonus. The notary's trail wasn't a maze either. Her commission number matched what I'd photographed, and her social posts were a scrapbook of happy clients outside the same two offices, one with Cascade's mountain logo staring like a polite hawk from the glass. In one photo, she was tagged at a charity mixer arm around a woman with Brooke's smile and different hair. Her mother, the one from the lobby image. I stared at the caption, so proud of Mom closing the gap for our seniors, and felt something in me go very still. Jonah came by with takeout and his laptop. He didn't try to talk me out of any of it. He sat down and asked where we should start. I showed him the licensing pages. He winced at the word appointments like it was a bruise he'd forgotten. So if money moves into Cascade products, he said, Grant gets paid. He didn't say the rest, but I heard it. And if paperwork makes that movement easier, the weather is always perfect for a storm. Brooke texted 3 times that afternoon, all velvet, check-ins, hearts, a photo of a soup she'd made for my favorite librarian. I answered once, thanks, leave it on the porch. Then I turned my phone face down and poured tea into the thermos, like a tiny ritual of jurisdiction. The steam curled up and took the last of my shakiness with it. If this is a machine, I said to Jonah, I want to see the gears. He were say, Caleb called as the rain came back. I'm at Harbor Works, he said, the co-working building where Grant rented a suite. Public hallway, no badges, no lines crossed. Their shred bin overflowed. He lowered his voice even though he didn't have to. Top page face up. I didn't touch it, but I can read upside down. What does it say? I asked, and my voice did that new thing where it didn't apologize first. Power of attorney, same template, different date. Last month, he said. Your name, Brooke as agent. Springing upon determination of incapacity, and a line about consolidation to recommended carriers. In English, move assets where commissions live. I heard him breathe. There's a sticky with initials that aren't yours. Jonah bowed his head like he was in church and had finally found the hymn. On my screen, Grant's email blinked again, bright as a lure. Quick check if we can execute the limited POA today. We can lock in a bonus rate before quarter end. Great timing for you. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to the log. Quarter end. Bonus. The sentence had taken off its costume. I walked to the fridge and read the boundary card out loud to remind my bones where they belong. No paper, no power. Slow is safe. My cup, my call. I poured more tea and let the thermos warm my palm until the heat had something to hold on to. I don't know if outrage is useful, but clarity is. It felt clean, like rain after a week of smoke. This wasn't about me being fragile or Brooke being kind. It was about a conveyor belt built to look like care. Health scare, urgency, signature product. Brooke played empathy at the entrance. The notary stamped the middle. Grant collected at the exit. Families always look softer when they're the ribbon on top. Jonah typed for a long time, then turned his laptop so I could see. An email to the bank manager, CC'd to me, and a new name, an attorney he'd found through his company's employee resource list. Hold all changes. Route any third-party requests to counsel. All contact in writing. He hit send without performing the moment. My phone buzzed again, this time with a photo from Caleb, A grainy shot of the shred bin's lip, the page visible enough to make the date and the recommended carrier's line legible. Underneath, a single sentence. Backdated draft. They were ready whether you were or not. The next morning, I asked them to meet me somewhere that wasn't a bank and wasn't anyone's living room, neutral ground with quiet corners and receipts for everything. The cafe on Ballard Avenue fit. Tile that made footsteps honest. Windows that didn't try to flatter you. A back table where the espresso machine covered pauses that might have turned into arguments. Jonah sat beside me, a legal pad and a pen he actually liked. Caleb was across from us with his notebook open, witness by invitation. I set the thermos in the center like a lighthouse and said the sentence I'd rehearsed. For everyone's clarity, we're recording this conversation with consent. Heads nodded. Red dots lit. The air changed temperature. Grant came in with a weatherproof smile. Brooke followed, pale and fragile at the edges, sweater sleeves pushed into cuffs like she'd taken the world's hands and asked them to be gentle. And then came the third person, exactly the face from the insurance office photo, a matching smile tested on other rooms, first Brooke's mother. Her perfume arrived a half second before she did, a floral that tried to sit on the good side of expensive. I thought it best I be here, she said, sliding into a chair without asking if the chair belonged to her. My daughter has been under terrible stress. We're all under stress, I said, and kept my voice level. Thank you for being on the record. Grant produced a folder like a magician who never learns a new trick. I trimmed the language, he said, clean, precise, no blanks. I didn't touch it. Before paper, I said. We need to clear a few things. Who engaged the notary we saw yesterday? I did, Brooke's mother said smoothly. Linda Voss has notarized for my clients for years. She's efficient. You're a notary's client? Caleb asked, genuinely curious. She tilted her head like the question was naive. I place coverage. We have seniors who need help signing their protections in a timely way. Insurance? I asked, although the answer had already shown up wearing its badge. Solutions, she said, as if the syllables themselves could deposit money. Annuities that guarantee income, products that keep people from outliving their savings. We close gaps. And when paperwork moves assets to those products, I said, does your team earn a commission? Her smile didn't move, but something behind it blinked. That's an uncharitable way to frame professional compensation. Datus. Accurate, though, Caleb said, which is his gift. Not cruel, just correct. Brooke's hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles typed their own message. Can we please not make this ugly? She whispered. No one wants to hurt anyone. Then let's be specific, I said. Who wrote the springing incapacity clause in the draft with my name? Who chose any licensed professional instead of my primary care physician? Grant's pen clicked, a nervous blink. It's standard. Standard for whom? Jonah asked. He had his father's voice just then, the one that arrives when you've already decided you're not afraid to be called difficult. Brooke's mother stroked the edge of the folder with a painted nail. Let's not get lost in weeds, she said. We saw signs of confusion. There was an episode at dinner. We moved quickly, as any prudent family would. You saw signs before dinner, I said softly, because the backdated draft existed before the rooftop. I slid my phone across the table so the photo Caleb had taken was right there between us. The shred bin rim, the date, the line about consolidation to recommended carriers. Why did a draft exist with my name on it, if no one had yet discussed anything with me? Her mouth opened, then closed. Frameworks make execution efficient, she said, reciting from a script you write on the inside of your own teeth. Whose efficiency? Caleb asked. Yours or hers? Grant tried to reverse the current. We're here because we care about Evelyn's safety, he said, almost convincing. If you didn't listen to the verbs. The other night proved she's vulnerable. The other night proved I'm observant, I said. I tapped the thermos. I pour what goes in my cup. We're not debating feelings, we're reconciling facts. Jonah leaned forward. Mom's talk screen showed cardiac glycosides in the drink. The ER recommended notifying law enforcement. If you're here to help, you'll help us document, not rush. It's not Lucas. Brooke flinched at the word glycosides. It wasn't theatrical. It cut something real in her face. She glanced at her mother. A look passed between them fast, old, practiced. I turned to Brooke, gently because not all truths need teeth. "Did you know about any of this, or did you let yourself be told it was for our good?" I asked. You can say, "I didn't know," or "I knew, and I'm afraid to say why." Her eyes shone in a way that had nothing to do with performance. She opened her mouth, closed it, then worked the hinge again. I knew some," she said, the words tiny but true. "Mom said." She stopped. The pause was a confession all by itself. "Mom said what?" Jonah asked. No anger in it, just invitation. Brooke's mother stiffened. "You don't interrogate my daughter." I kept my palms flat on the table. "We're not interrogating. We're inventorying. Paper, not panic." Brooke blinked hard, once. "Mom said if we didn't act, we'd miss the window to qualify," she whispered. "That events make approvals easier. That if we waited for Evelyn to get worse, it would be messy. She said, we help them cross sooner, while people still feel grateful." The sentence hung between us, naked and unforgivable. Grant cleared his throat, reached for the folder like a man grabbing a jacket in a fire. "This is getting twisted," he said. "We're losing the practical." "Thank you, no. The practical," Caleb said, "is whose money moves where, when, and why." He flipped his notebook around so they could see his notes. "You wrote a clause that lets any doctor declare incapacity. You hired a notary you control. You prepared documents in advance. You stood to get paid when assets moved. That's not care. That's choreography." For a beat, all I could hear was the espresso machine steam milk into white noise. I didn't want to feel triumphant. I wanted to feel done. I looked at Brooke's mother, then at Grant, and finally at Brooke, who seemed suddenly much younger and much older. "I'm not a burden you get a bonus for managing," I said, quiet and unshakable. "I'm a person with a policy. No paper, no power. Slow is safe. My cup, my call." Grant tried one last pivot. "Let's take emotions out," he said, smiling that weatherproof smile. "We can sign a narrower version today. Keep everyone protected. Revisit later." "We're not signing anything today," Jonah said. "We're sending what we have to the detective." As if the room had been waiting for a cue, my phone vibrated on the table. A new voicemail transcription surfaced, simple as a doorbell. "Detective Lee, call when convenient. We've reviewed the ER report and your email attachments. Please keep everyone present." I pressed speaker and returned the call. She picked up on the first ring. "Miss Hart," she said, voice like clear glass. "We've heard enough. Please remain where you are." Detective Lee didn't arrive with drama. She arrived like rain, steady, matter of fact, and left with copies. The cafe returned to its usual noises, and I realized my shoulders had dropped a full inch without asking permission. Brooke went home with her mother, both of them small and fast in the way people get when their certainty unravels. Grant left behind the folder he'd tried to sell me. I slid it across the table to the detective and didn't watch him go. The next week was paper without panic. Jonah found a lawyer through his company's resource list, someone with a kind face and a boring website, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. She read everything out loud like I do, and never used a sentence that needed a chaperone. We filed a simple letter revoking any previously drafted authority tied to my name, whether I knew about it or not. Soundview put a permanent flag on my profile. No third-party changes without in-person verification and physician letter on file. We set wire thresholds high enough to make a thief yawn and turned every emergency into a 2-business-day pause. Jonah came over with deli sandwiches and an apology he didn't dress up. "I wanted to be the good son who fixes things," he said, picking at the crust like it could answer for him. I forgot the difference between fixing and fastening. I poured tea into the thermos and handed him the first cup. "Then let's write it down," I said, and we did 2 signatures, 1 page, stuck on the fridge under the fairy magnet. Hart Family Boundary Policy. No wires, no cash, no temporary loans, no blank signatures. All major decisions in writing, after sleep. If fear is in the room, so is a cooling-off period. He signed first. I watched his hand, steady as his father's once was, curve through our last name like it knew the shape by heart. The house felt larger by an inch. Detective Lee called with updates I won't narrate for sport. Investigations move like old elevators. They stop at every floor. What mattered was this: the pieces that were supposed to be separate, health scare, paperwork, product, were finally seen as parts of the same machine. Grant had emails that read like weather forecasts for quarter end. The notary had a calendar that knew exactly which rooms to visit. Brooke's mother had language she'd recited so often it sounded like prayer. Consequences belong to them now. I don't need to score it. What I needed was a door that opens on Tuesday nights at the library. We printed a flyer with a title that made me laugh because it sounded like a class I would have taken at 25 if I'd known to: Elder Boundaries 101. No drama, just a handout, one page, both sides, with the 3C rule, the 7 questions before you sign, and a simple incident log anyone could copy. People showed up with tote bags and stories, and the kind of tired that sinks into shoulders. We made tea in mismatched mugs. We practiced saying, "I'll review this at home," and "Who else is in the room when we sign?" and "Slow is safe." I told them about my thermos and how ridiculous it felt to put a sticker on it. Everyone wanted a sticker. Caleb spoke for 10 minutes about how to keep records so you don't have to keep explaining yourself. He held up a file folder with tabs that would have made my old colleagues proud. "Paper makes liars tired," he said, and the room did that soft exhale groups do when a sentence lands where it's needed. Brooke texted me once, a small apology that wasn't a legal statement and didn't need to be. I answered with one line: "I'm safe, and I wish that for you." Her mother didn't write, which is fine. Some silences are fences that keep the garden from being eaten to its roots. On Sundays, Jonah comes over and we cook like we used to: eggs and potatoes in a cast-iron pan that clicks its own metronome. He tells me about a woman in his running group who laughs with her whole face. I tell him to bring her by when he's ready. We eat at the patio table even when the air pretends it's still winter, and we keep our coats on and our tea hot in cups that fit our hands. The thermos sits between us, dented, stubborn, sage. It isn't magic. It's just mine. People sometimes ask if I feel triumphant. I don't. I feel ordinary in a way I didn't realize I'd been missing. The mailbox holds what I expect. My name sits only where I put it. When I forget and reach for easier, I read the card on the fridge and remember that ease isn't the same as safety, and safety isn't the same as love. If you came over right now, I'd hand you a copy of the checklist and make you tea. I'd tell you what I tell the Tuesday group: help is welcome. Control is not. Write it down. Put it where you can see it on the tired days. Find one neighbor who knows how to be boring in a crisis, and one bank manager who enjoys rules. Teach your people how to love you without holding your pen. I'm not a lesson or a warning label. I'm a woman with a policy and a kitchen light that makes everything look more honest at dusk. The rain is back on the porch railing, steady as a metronome. I pour another cup and let the steam soften the edges of the day. Your cup, your call, final takeaway, and CTA. Here's what this story boils down to. Help is welcome, control is not. Boundaries aren't a wall, they're a door that only opens when you're present. Or, in Evelyn's words, your cup, your call. In real life, protection looks less like heroics and more like habits. Write your rules where you can see them. Slow decisions down until fear leaves the room. Treat paperwork like power tools used with light, time, and a witness. If someone rushes you, for your own good, press pause. If an offer gets easier when you're scared, ask why. Keep a simple record of what happened and when. Paper makes liars tired. And remember the anchor, that dented sage thermos. Choose what goes in your cup financially, medically, emotionally. Try these today. Print your boundary card. No paper, no power. Slow is safe. My cup, my call. Start a family incident log: date, time, who, what, where, photo receipts. Run the 3C rule. Calm, collect, confirm before signing or agreeing. Use the 7 questions before you sign. Who drafted? Who benefits? What's the revocation? Who notifies? Who witnesses? Which doctor? Where's the original? Set bank alerts and holds for wires, beneficiary changes, and keep big changes in writing after sleep. This is not legal advice. If this resonated, drop one sentence you'll tell yourself on a shaky day. I choose the pace. I can review at home. Then download the free 1-page checklist, 3C plus 7 questions plus log, and subscribe to this series if you want more calm, paper-first stories that end in real-world power. You are not difficult for asking for clarity, you're diligent. May tonight meet you with quiet, and may you sleep on a boundary you chose.